Welcome to Reward Nerds, the podcast that deep dives into the areas of compensation and benefits. My name is Jon, and I'm your host, and I'm your fellow Reward Nerd. In today's episode of Reward Nerds, I'm joined by Henrike von Platen, who's the CEO and founder of the Fair Pay Innovation Lab. And I think she has a fascinating story as to how she is working from a non-reward angle with fair pay and thereby things like pay equity. So we'll be talking about that today, how you as a company actually could get certified. I mean, think about that, certified fair paying employer. That's a different take on things and actually can give you a stamp of saying you are approved externally to do this the right way. And I think as a non-profit company and the person that Henrike is, I think you should really enjoy this episode. So please do join us here. Henrike, welcome so much to our podcast, Reward Nerds. And you are not a reward nerd, and but still you work in areas that is very tightly connected to some of the key things that we're doing in rewards at the moment. It's a different angle to everything that's around pay transparency. And I'm so happy to have you here, Henrike. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jon. I'm happy to be here. And I am a reward nerd if it's about being fair rewarded.
Yeah, so I think it's, first of all, I was very happy that you accepted that we would be having this chat, because what we're trying to do in Reward Nerds podcast here is to look at rewards from different angles. So, of course, we'll cover it from the reward professional angle. Well, we have a couple of, or quite a few reward specialists and heads of rewards to talk about things from very large companies to very complex companies to small companies to big and small reward departments, etc. But we also want to talk to all of those really interesting angles that are related to rewards. So we're talking to CHROs, we're talking to chairmen of the boards of companies to see what their expectations are like. And you are on a different side again, on the certification side, if we can call it that, around making sure that companies are actually treating their employees fairly and actually paying fairly. And so you're CEO and founder of Fair Pay Innovation Lab. So I think, maybe we should start there, Henrike, about, if you could actually go a little bit into depth around your background and how you ended up starting a nonprofit. Let's start there. Starting a nonprofit company that looks into ensuring companies are actually paying fairly.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question to start with. Long answer, short answer, medium-sized answer. Let's see.
We'll take the long one. It's a podcast. People are nerds, right? It's
Yes,
okay.
yes, exactly.
I do think it's an
that.
interesting
I'm
story, so
thinking
you can do that.
yeah. Okay, let's see. Where shall we start? Let's start in 2007. Which is 10 years before I actually founded the FPI in 2017. So in 2007, I entered a women's organization called the Business and Professional Women. And I entered it at that time for reasons that we don't want to talk about now, but I wanted to know more women that were working as well. And I thought, okay, that's a good one. It's international. I have an international background. And I was seeing like what they were doing, and I entered into the Berlin Club. And in 2008, I was already on the board of the German Federation, and everything started to move around the Equal Pay Day. So Equal Pay Day was sort of brought to Germany from the US, from my previous people on the board. And then I was seeing how things were being managed, or how they were being done in an NGO like that. And I ended up on the board so fast, and then being president of the German Federation in 2010, because I sometimes say it's like you give your little finger and you say something and you have an idea, and suddenly it makes a whoosh and you find yourself doing it. So what then happened was that I saw this Equal Pay Day campaign, and this organization does many things. It's about businesswomen, and there are lots of things that you could do. But I saw that campaign when I was president. I thought, okay, we'll do this and we'll do nothing else. Of course, you do a little bit else, but put it sort of on the top priority. And then we just I went doing equal pay day campaign for year and year and year and year, got the money for it, did all the running of the campaign. And I think everybody who's listening into this podcast probably has heard about the equal pay day. It's all around the world, it's everywhere. So the issue with this was, so that's why it's so important for the story. I had never ever thought about this problem of pay gaps before in my life. I never thought about it. And during the campaigning and finding out everything there, I thought, this is really getting on my nerves. How can this be? It's so unfair. How can this actually be? And when my presidency ended in 2016, we still had huge gaps. They had hardly moved. Everybody keeps calculating that this is going to take another 200 years to get done and so on. And we've been fighting it for 100 years. And actually, it sounds like this is just never going to happen. So I was like thinking, okay, what do I do now? Go back to interim management, do my work, whatever. I was always self-employed. Said, or should I just maybe try to fix this finally? And that was sort of the birth hour of the FPI. That was a moment when I decided in 2016 to found the Fair Pay Innovation Lab. It was a moment when I changed my wording from equal pay to fair pay. Different story, maybe you ask for it later, but it was a deliberate change in name at that time. And the focus I set was deliberately on organizations and companies, because when you have done awareness rising campaign for years and you see nothing moves, you actually know the solutions, because I mean, it's always like the solutions, we know all the reasons. There's sort of no knowledge gap about the gender pay gaps, but there is a solutions gap. It's sort of not happening. And then I said, okay, enough of the awareness rising. I'm not a politician either, so not the legislation. So in between, where do we sit? We see companies. The core problem of paying unfairly, in my view, is the company, any company, because that's where the money is sort of paid out. So if it's not fair, it's where it's being paid out. So with the Fair Pay Innovation Lab, we set the focus on the companies to make sure, okay, this we focus on, they can change fast if they want to. And from there we go. And that's when we founded the FPI in 2017.
Great. And during that time of your presidency, you were also directly connected to a number of politicians. You talked to the Minister of Equality and these kinds of things, and probably got quite a few perspectives as to how do politicians see this. And I always find that to be super interesting. I think a lot of the listeners, and myself included, know quite a bit about how companies are thinking. And how individuals within companies are thinking. But for the macro side of things, then we need to understand how are the politicians actually acting and thinking, and how are they kind of pushing this initiative. So any reflections on that from, of course, it was primarily from a German angle, I assume. But what were your reflections on that?
Definitely the German angle at that time, but also, of course, having traveled quite a few times to the Commission on the Status of Women, on the German, how do you call this? Regierungsdelegation, that's the German word for it. So it's like the delegation of the government in a way to the UN. So being on those delegations, talking with many politicians on all these topics, I think the main trouble in a way is, but that's the way that politics work, even though you might wish for the zero outcome on pay gaps for any reasons, as a politician, you are not capable of changing it completely alone. You're always relying on all other parties, on a coalition, on whatever, and you need to do some legislation that will go through, and it will always grab a bit short with any legislation, actually. You can never make a legislation for the 100%. It's always sort of short off. That's why we see like stuff like you need to have an adjusted pay gap of ±5 or something, where I would say, hey, come on, 5%, why? But they need to sort of reflect on what they can agree on. So it's always an agreeing on something, and then you find the smallest point that you can agree on, and that's it. Now, for some things like fair pay, I would say this is sort of a human right issue. There should be no smallest or biggest agreement. It should just be the right thing. And this somehow doesn't work. So it's really, really talking to some, knowing some that were, in my view, similar to me in a way of the wish and wanting to do this, but they just can't do it alone. It's sort of a different angle. That's why I actually said I don't want to focus on the political side, because it's just so slow, and it's so dependent on so many factors. I don't want to say you get nowhere, but on this topic you get nowhere because it hasn't been done for over 100 years. So I'm free to say that one. But yeah, that's sort of the political part. So for me, it's like I'm too uh, I'm not patient enough to wait for that. Let's put it that way. So that's why I sort of said, okay, it's good to work together with them on many things, and we did lots of projects. We got funded from the Ministry for Family Affairs, so it gave us a kickstart actually, having those connections and them funding projects that are for the good. So I'm okay with that, but it's not enough. But I think to finish this round, I don't think politics are there to solve everything either. There is a society, there are the companies. I see always like these three parts in what we do. It's like political part, societal part of you and I. We have to decide what we pay for certain things. Even when we go shopping, it's our decision to what hairdresser we go and what we pay for stuff. We can choose and we decide, and we choose all the time. And then on the company side that employ people, how do they sort of act and treat their people? So I think I went for, after doing the society part, I then went for the fast track.
That's great. So that's obviously going to be the focus for the podcast, and what we'll be discussing is how do companies actually act with these things. One of the things, so this is tightly linked to, but it's not identical to pay transparency, because this, of course, is something that is, first of all, it's a global thing around fair pay, and it doesn't start with or stop with a directive like the EU Pay Transparency Directive. With the focus on fair pay as an overall thing, what we kind of have been talking to a number of companies on the past year and a half, 2 years, is that companies need to start finding some sort of a narrative. They need to figure out. Very few companies deliberately pay unfairly, right? I think that's a starting point. That is fair to say. There are, I am sure, companies that do pay unfairly, and more, maybe more so than we like to hope. But companies that we currently talk to are probably the ones that have things somewhat under control. They have a number of unconscious biases that over time has led to situations where there are too few females in leading positions. They do not get the pay rises that they may expect and should have. Promotions or not during maternity leaves. All of these kinds of things, and that's kind of the current state of a number of companies. But once they dig into it and figure out what does the core data look like, what is it actually, how do they start working with being from status quo, whatever that might be, good or bad, to actually trying to pay fairly. And when you talk to the companies in general, companies want to pay fairly, right? There are very, very few that are against the thought. I never heard anyone say, no, deliberately we are going to be paying men higher than women for doing the exact same job. Now, you can pay people differently, of course. It's not about paying everyone equally, but it's about treating them equally and thereby paying fairly. And so for this, companies need to figure out how do they, after they find out where they are, how do they start working with this? And how do they, in this process, start owning a narrative, which means they can do this in a sustainable way. And I think that's something that we should be touched upon a bit, is because you could say, in theory, if a company has unlimited funds, they could just fix things once identified. But that very rarely is the case. Companies have whatever limitation based on shareholders, based on profit margins, what have you. So how do they practically work with things in a good and sustainable way? And thereby they need to find a positive, good, and honest way to control the narrative. Being honest and open and saying we are not where we want to be today. We've just concluded that we have issues in bits and pieces of the organization, even it could be within a certain country or a certain department or what have you, and then identifying that and start working with it. And I think that process of going from understanding where you are to understanding how you can work with getting to where you want to be is key. And it's one of the things I've been actually pushing a lot to our clients, is to try to find a way to own this narrative, to make sure that it actually fits with the company's values and purpose and what they already communicated, and then prove it, show what you're doing. And that's where it's very tightly linked to what you guys are doing in the Fair Pay Innovation Lab and the certifications you're having. So could you kind of just take the quick sales pitch, if you will, as to what that is? Because I love that kind of productization of a process and the fact that you have certifications on it. So it'd be great to have some deeper understanding around how certifications are actually happening, how you can truly say that this is objective, and this is actually something companies can use and prove to the world that they are doing the right thing.
Yep. Okay. I take that ball. But before I do that number, I'll go back to what you've just said, because there are a couple of things there. Like when you say, okay, they could just take the money and close the gaps. I think there are quite a few that could actually just do that, and some do that, and it's not really a money issue, because it's not that much money. They're usually quite surprised after having done a good pay gap analysis of how little in comparison it is. So that's not the issue. But the trouble is that if they do that, only that analysis, check the gaps, close the gaps, tick box, done, then they will not have a long-term narrative. It will not be something implemented and steadily keeping going like that. They will be doing this annually, and they will be hiring and firing people, and the gaps will just appear again, and they will need to close them again by adapting. So that's the fastest way, but it's not the one that sort of stays, which means usually one of the questions is if a company has some kind of mission, vision, culture, then they should know why they pay the people. And you're right, I've also never ever met a person that has told me that they want to pay unfairly. Nobody says that. That's actually the reason for me switching from equal pay to fair pay. I didn't talk about that for a couple of years. And then I started to talk about it, why I changed it. And the reason was, when you talk about equal pay to anybody out there in the corporate world, and you ask, what about equal pay? You run straight into a wall. And it's a concrete wall, and it goes woof. And they say, of course we pay equally. And you're out of the conversation. It's so hard to keep this ball then talking. The moment you go and say, oh, are you paying fairly? Do you want to pay fair wages? Da, 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 da. Suddenly there is no concrete wall. It's more like a fluffy bubble, and they are like sinking and saying, yes, of course we do pay fairly. And then a couple of sentences later, they find out, well, maybe I could imagine there is something which might not be so 100% fair. They are into the thoughts about it. It's an open conversation, and you will find out they want to pay fairly. They're not 100% sure if it is fair, and they are into the discussion about their culture, about the reasons why they're paying or not, if having a master degree is worth more money on the same job or not, because it's their culture or not their culture. So that part is very important to understand, because of course it's also part of the certification in a way. It's not directly written as a line, but it comes, because otherwise you will never reach the limits that we sort of ask for. And I think it's the most important conversation to have for the companies in their own organizations with others around. So what does fairness mean to them, because it means something different to them, to you, to me. We all see fairness as something different. And then we come around from the FPI and we say, okay, and we certify you with a warranty mark for fairness, for fair pay. And you would say, hey, how is this possible? Can this actually be? It was quite a stony road, and it took us about 1.5 years to make from the certification that we designed a certification mark, sort of a registered warranty mark. And just a couple of days ago, our lawyers told me, after I had asked them again, and they said, yes, you're still worldwide unique. So there is no other warranty mark for fair pay, which means we guarantee that your company pays fairly if you pass all the steps. Now, these steps, as you said before, the tiny the sales pitch on what's the content, sort of, in a way, it's very simple, but it's very hard. And it's very flexible. So there are multiple things in there. And if you see it on first sight, you say, okay, there are 17 pages of regulations to it, boil them down, and it's a couple of pages. And you see that the most important part is the company has to do a thorough pay equity analysis, a regression-based analysis on all their wages. So anybody might, who has never heard about regression, you just take all your wages and all the data that you have, and you can grab about your employees, how old they are, how long they've been working, what job role they have, or whatever you call the grading system that you have or don't. Whatever you have, you take all that, you dump it into the right software, and you make a regression analysis. And you have an outcome, which is the unadjusted pay gap, which is around 16 in Europe, or whatever, you get a big number, and then you get the adjusted pay gap. And this might be a couple of percent. We call it the unexplained rest. Details later. So this you have to do, this analysis. And having done that and seeing the results, no matter how good or bad they are, a company will set measures to get better. They will work on their culture. They will do what we just said before. All the fairness thoughts will suddenly pop up. So where does this come from? And you start to think. And with that, they have passed stage 1, because it's sort of one of the biggest hurdles for company to actually do this analysis. We say no transparency needed at that point. We are all for pay transparency, but in the certification, we deliberately have it differently over the steps, because we need companies to do this first step. Even if they are secretive about their numbers, they will be certified as phase 1 fair pay analyst. They keep going, they keep going, they keep going. They do another analysis, and they get an adjusted pay gap of ±1, which means they really have to aim for 0 pay gap. Usually you see gaps between 1.5% and 3% on the first run. And we ask them to go for 0 and wiggle around ±1, which means you also want to go into the plus and minus. You don't want to stay always in favor of women or always in favor of men. You want both sides. You've reached the fair pay developer stage with that. And you only reach the leader phase when you have drilled down your unadjusted pay gap also to ±10. This is important because this shows a bit also where we come from. Why is this about gender? Why do we have this? Lots of people always tend to say, but with your second phase, fair pay developer, I've done it. I'm paying fairly. I've closed the gaps. True, right. Let it feel like platinum, maybe. But still, is it clear that all genders are evenly a bit sort of dispersed around the groups? Do all have the same chances for the same jobs? So this kind of spirit, coming more like from the business and professional women's side, coming more from gender topics in general, is sort of built into the last phase, because we say you need to aim for ±10. You will not get there if you only have women on the low hierarchy and men on the high hierarchy. You will just not reach it. And you need to work on that as well. And one important part also, and then I'll finish that one off, is we take the gender pay gap as the base for the analysis and for the whole certification. So it's, and we talk about fair pay. And still it's gender on top. Why? If you look into the corporate world worldwide, in some countries, in some companies, they don't know much about their employees. They usually know the gender. maybe the birthday, maybe not much more, maybe not even where they live, whatever, but they know the gender. So if we go for what we know, 50-50 in the world, and everybody can sort of start a calculation, we go from there. Now, if you want to reach those numbers and really implement a fair system and really make sure that the factors that you're using are objective, the whole story around it, if you do all that, we could make an analysis one day using the blue and the green eyes instead of gender, and we should theoretically come to the same results. So that's sort of for that understanding. And here I stop. The dog can go alone and see into what direction we keep diving.
Yeah. Well, that's great, and I think what I in a way people could, I think, visualize in their heads that three stages of this. If you call it analyst and developer and leader, and whether you call it bronze, silver, and gold. But the fact is that there are three levels of certification. They're all really, really sought after, and gives a communication tool in a sense to be able to say that we are actually already working on this. We're not where we want to be yet, but we take this seriously. And I think that's kind of one of the things I want to say to a lot of companies out there is the effort of starting isn't a big hurdle. It's fair enough that you're not plus minus 1% now. I mean, it's a reality. But reality is also that you can start with the analyst level or the bronze level, if you would like to call it that, because all it requires, in a sense, is, of course, that you document what you're doing and you get a starting point and that you have a plan for improving it. And already that is a strong message to send to the company and to shareholders and externally if you want, but at the very least internally, and make that commitment. Everyone needs to pay fairly anyway. There's already anti-discrimination laws out there, right? And it's just now it's going to be much more transparent. So in a way, this is a way, as I see it, they're going to be doing the work anyway, and this is a small. Well, I have to say that. I think it is a small cost to it because you're a non-profit company. So it really isn't big numbers we're talking about for a company here. So it's a small cost of getting that in place. And then I really want to say something that impressed me when we started looking into the FPI and what you guys were doing. Because at first I was shocked and then I was impressed. And that's your process around how do you kind of approve who is certified, right? So how do you get the actual certification? Because it's easy to think that if you use a consultancy that you recommend, you have a number of approved consultancies that can be doing the analysis on behalf of the FPI, and a number of tools that can be used in terms of saying these regression models are made in the right way, etc. So that's kind of already made. And then my fear in the beginning was that, and luckily we're one of those that are approved, so that's nice. but how can we with credibility tell our clients that we're not just making sure that you get certified because you pay us, but we can actually ensure that it's correct. And when I started looking at you have this screening board of companies that are going to then approve whether or not this application lives up to the standards. And then at first I thought this has to become chaos, because when I looked at the list of companies and people in the screening board, of course they were skilled people. They were well-qualified individuals from well-qualified companies. No doubt about that. But then I started seeing, hang on, they're competitors. How on earth can they be competitors doing this? And that is the brilliance of it, Henrike. I think that is so brilliant, because if you have a global consultancy that is on a screening board, you could easily start thinking, then they'll just get all their clients through. But the second that the biggest competitors of this same company is part of the same screening board, you know it's going to be tested, yeah? And I think that's a brilliant move, I have to say. Well done. And the same, you have the same thing with competitors on the provider side as well in terms of tools. So just having that, I can't recall how many you have in the screening board. Is it 7, 8 people or so? Yeah. But the fact that you have global competitors in there, thereby kind of stress testing each other's methodologies, I think is brilliant.
Thank you. I think it's very important. I mean, the reason, maybe some background to that is, when we designed the certification from the content side to see what should it look like to be a good certificate. I've never been a friend of certifications for other things. I'm actually not. I really didn't want this at the beginning. It was more companies asking for it and saying, why don't you certify? And I was like, oh God, no, not another one of those badges somewhere. For me, it was very important to make sure if we do this, it has to really, really stand. That's why we went the long road of registering certification mark, which is not very common yet and not very simple. And then when you're in that process, you try to figure out to make it more neutral, more neutral, more neutral. And one thing also is, I mean, we are not for profit, as you said. We are this under German law because we have a certain goal that goes into the basket of not for profit reasons. Our goal is fair pay for all. So with this goal, we get there. That's what we have. Now, fair pay for all means all working employees worldwide. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of companies. That's really big.
You're going to be busy, Henrike.
Yes, I will be, I'm sure, but not only me. And the idea of then was, okay, I'm all for this goal. Now, how can we manage that without having an FPI becoming huge with 10,000 employees covering the world, certifying and doing analysis? And I said, actually, I don't like the analysis part. I don't like the consulting part. I don't really want to do that. And I don't want FPI to do that. I want to be the network of everybody who does that outside. And that's when we started to implement this sort of double, triple neutrality process. We said, okay, I cannot, as a warranty mark, certify my own results. So FPI should never you often see these kind of structures, not for profit here and a company there, but it's all is sort of the same people and actually you certifying your own results. So that's a no-go. So I said, okay, what if we audit companies that are able to follow our regulations concerning methodology and pay gap analysis, and we audit them. So they get an external audit from 2 professors that we have now that do that audit. And then this software or consultancy using software, whatever, we have 25 partners at the moment now, is audited by FPI, and then they go ahead and do the analysis, and we certify that outcome where we know it's been done in the right way. So here we have one part of the neutrality. And then I said, okay, I don't want to be responsible, me, myself, and I plus FPI team, somehow only looking at all those results and making a decision, but get the experts in there. So the screening board resets every 2 years, and it's supposed to have people in there that are from our partners, like you said. So you have the global competitors in there. And even having the partners at the beginning was like the first ones saying, oh, can we have exclusivity for the certification? And I was saying, well, no, because how are we going to certify the world if one does that exclusively? So, of course, the partners don't have our certification exclusively either. You could be doing 5 different certifications if you wanted to. But of course, I enjoy very much that that's usually not the case, but that's another story. But then if you have a screening board with these experts, some of the corporate world, some of the partner, those that do analysis, you actually come to great results. And this way we can certify every quarter. So every quarter we have a meeting and we see applications. And with this setup of the partners and everything, we can certify the world. I'm positive on that. We're on 3 continents already. So here we go.
That's strong. So then taking this into the context of pay transparency and the EU directive that a lot of people are focusing a lot on, at the very least in Europe, do you start seeing any acceleration in the needs of these things now?
Yeah, in Germany, there was the so-called Entgelttransparenzgesetz, so the law on pay transparency some years ago. And you already noticed there's a push. So we had politics earlier. When we have politicians acting and making legislation, this is pushing companies to do stuff. Sometimes they ignore it still, but they get a push. So in that, and I'm starting with that one because I was more on the German side at that point. When you saw that, there was the pay equity analysis was a, how do you say it? It was a, they said you could be doing this. It's a, I don't know the word anymore, not just not appearing in my head, but it was like not an obligation, but it's a suggestion to do that. And more companies than they thought actually followed that suggestion. Now, still not enough. And now the EU directive comes. And now here we get sort of the fuller load of stuff that you could be doing. FPI sent quite a few comments there as well. So we're happy to see things that we saw were good in there as well. But now it's an EU directive, and companies feel like, oh God, what's going to happen next year? Wait a minute, let's have a look, and they are starting. And it's a pity that they need the push, but if it helps, here we go. It could be even stronger. So I do feel that companies are asking, and the funny thing is that they come to us and then they say, well, if I've done the universal fair pay check, am I then have I then sort of, do I comply to the EU directive? I said, well, no. If you follow the universal fair pay check, you have done better, because you will have done so much more, because a directive, a legislation can never ask for the 100%, as we've said before. It can never ask for the full story. So there's things in there that are good, but they are not final. So you have to be transparent, but you don't need to reach zero, for example. So you cannot compare a certification to a legislation. It's just not possible. But it moves you into the definitely right direction, and it helps to have that push. And especially about the transparency part, some things are quite aligned. I mean, when we talk about objective factors and the analysis, we talk about the factors that are actually allowed to be in this analysis, like green and blue eyes are not fair, and a screening board would never be able, you would never be able to convince it of this being an objective factor. Now, if you say experience is an objective factor, we would probably be convinced if you explain to us what experience means to you and how you sort of measure that in a way and what it counts for. And these factors then again need to be transparent. In the universal fair pay, it's the last stage. So it's at the leader level where this has to be made transparent latest, let's put it that way. In the EU directive, you have similarities. You have to be able to explain to your employees what they're getting paid for. So what is this? You mention your 5 variables and you tell them what they mean. So if you can explain this to the screening board of the FPI, you can explain this to your employees too. And you go transparent about this. And the good part about transparency is usually, I don't know, maybe Jon, you have another thought on that, but I always think when a company doesn't want to go transparent on certain things about pay, and I think about this for a couple of minutes, I just find no other reason than either they don't know how to explain certain things or they have something to hide. There is no other reason to be intransparent on pay. If you can explain everything in a fair way, watch out, fair variables, why shouldn't you do that? What would sort of keep you behind? And what we see that companies are more and more open, but also, and you mentioned that before, if you think about the openness and the stage of a certification or the way that you have to walk as a company because you're maybe not ready yet, you need to actually start at the beginning. And even if you think your numbers are still bad, some are proud to be below 5%. I mean, it's legislation, it's great. Just because FPI wants you below 1%, you can still be proud with 2.5%. And you can own this narrative and talk about it and take your employees with you, because usually you have 10,000 employees and you tell them from never anything about pay transparency, never. And then from one day to the other, suddenly you say, hey, we're fair pay leaders, we have no pay gaps. And all employees will probably go, wait a minute. This can't be possible. if you would have taken them on the road a year or two or whatever it takes, a month, and they would have seen the evolution, then they believe it, they see it, they feel the culture. So it's also a lot about, um, like we say, it's a journey. It's a journey. We travel together to Planet Fair, like I like to say, and take everybody on that journey as soon as you can. Why don't we ask for 100% transparency from step one? Because it might not be useful. Sometimes you need to go stepwise in transparency. We don't want to overdo it if it wouldn't work. Companies are very different, cultures are very different, and that's where we come in with the full flexibility, so to say. And so very hard, but flexible on variables, things like that, if it's understandable. I mean, I know that I'm talking to you and you know everything about certification. So if you feel there's something missing to comprehend it better, then please ask.
Yeah, no, but what I think is super interesting is your comment just before in terms of why, what could the reasons be for not being transparent except for trying to hide something, and I think it's a fair statement, but it's of course not as black and white as that always, in the sense that it's more often that that's what I see it at the least now, they're not ready, meaning it doesn't mean that they're trying to hide something, but they don't have the overviews. They don't know what it looks like. It could be their job architecture that is decent but not good. It could certainly be, and we see this a lot, M&A situations. They just acquired a company or two, or they did so 2 years ago, but they're not fully integrated. And that group is treated differently. They know it's not necessarily right in the new setup, in the full corporate setup, but it's also too cumbersome to kind of change, or they can't do it overnight, or it's too expensive to change overnight, and what have you. And if they haven't kind of aligned leveling, then they may show something that looks like it's terrible, but actually may not be. So they're afraid of, that's what at least some are afraid of, showing something that may indeed show the completely wrong picture. Either make it look perfect without being perfect and thereby having to pull back on it, or making it look like they have a giant issue and get a lot of reactions, whereas reality, if they looked into it, it was okay. So I think we should really help companies understand they don't need to start with perfect. They don't need to do, and I think that part of the honesty and transparency is something a lot of companies need to work with, of saying, we know we don't know everything, but we're going to start somewhere. We're confident that our headquarters has good data. We didn't just acquire another company. We're in one location, so let's start there and get some experiences and show how you're doing it, etc. Because I think that is some of the hurdles for some, is that they're fearing, just because they're not getting the full overview globally in every part and etc., then they can't do anything. That's not the case, right? So you can start somewhere, get some experiences, and see where it takes you. I think that's a key learning for companies, is to say, okay, so we do know that we have decent data somewhere. Let's have a look at that first.
Absolutely. You have to start somewhere. That's actually quite interesting to see when I look at the companies that are getting certified over the past few years, the different ways to do this. We've had big global companies getting certified like for 100% of the global company, every employee everywhere at once. And we also see, interestingly, those companies that say, okay, I'll do my headquarter first, and then I go to X, Y, Z country, and I have a couple of countries. And actually, suddenly I have different status. I have a leader here and an analyst here and a developer in between. And I can start to sort of do best practice exchanges between my countries and the people that are working there, and figure out, why are there any differences, or are there maybe even the factors different per country, because in some countries certain things have to be there, others don't. And to see how this works, to then sort of travel step country by country, so to say, until you reach the headquarter again, and then you make a global analysis, because then you have suddenly all data after a while. There are so many different ways to do this, which is okay. And each company sort of has their own best version of the road, let's say it this way. And sometimes they, of course, ask, okay, what do I do? And now, how will this work? What variables do I need? And where do I start? I say, well, I don't know. Uh, let's talk. Let's have a look. And then you start to talk with them. And as we don't sort of do consulting, and I'm not in those conversations most of the time because they are done at the partner level, they are done with us at the beginning when they come to us because they are still looking for partners. But what I find very, very interesting, and it's what I have most fun doing actually, is we don't sort of certify and say goodbye. I mean, the certificate is valid for 1 year anyway. So, I mean, you hire, fire, it's like your car. A technical thing on your car, you need to redo this every year. You need to check that you're staying where you are, that you're getting better, or that you're keeping as good as you are. So you're doing this annually anyway. So what we do in the FPI is we have our so-called family management circles. That means every quarter we have a meetup from all the companies that are in the certification process at whatever status, and we put them together into an online room like us two now, and we try to sort of keep it small and say no more than 10 companies. And then they start to consult each other in a way. I moderate them always personally, and I don't want to miss any, because it's sort of the best part to see how they talk, what kind of challenges they have in the comp and ben department, or where they do the analysis, the HR. So it's a mix of people. Where do they stand? What do they think about the EU directive? What have they done with their grading system, with the last mergers and acquisitions? What happened? Sort of, they discuss everything, and they're very, very open. I really like that. There's no competition between companies, even if they would be in the same area. When it's about fair pay, they are very open on how they solve this and sort of discuss this. And yeah, that's what I enjoy most.
It does also sound very interesting to be a kind of a fly on the wall on these discussions. And it also seems like one of those areas where they could get the most value, because you can always discuss, how can you take the best way forward? But when you hear it from peers and from other companies on the journey saying, well, you have to be aware of this issue, specifically in this area. We faced this problem, but we also found this solution. Let's go straight for the solution.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Benefits was an interesting one that we had, like, it ended up talking about benefits and what is a benefit and how many can you have and what are they like. And the company with 70 different benefits, and another one was like none or three. And you start to discuss what is a benefit and how can you make sure it's fair and everybody, whatever, so many things about that. And you have sort of the real life experiences, not reading it from an article somewhere, but yeah, my fun part.
Okay. Very good, Henrike. I think we should probably try to summarize this a little bit and round it up, because we we could go super enthusiastic, but we also kind of end up in the same path somehow around the fact that there is a tight link between paying fairly and what we see in rewards anyway. That we're looking at pay equity. You guys are looking at this on a global scale and been doing it longer and outside of the concept of the directive. It is a non-profit company that is unbiased and actually use experts from everywhere. So I think that is brilliant, and that's one of the key reasons that companies like ourselves love working with you, because you can actually say this is a stamp that not only looks good but actually has a true value to it, because you can prove that this is actually you're working as a company in these directions. And you can use it as a communication tool, etc. So from my side, I'm just very happy that the FPI exists, that actually there is such an organization. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people out there simply didn't know that there is a possibility of an unbiased, non-profit and certified process that is possible. So any famous last words from you, Henrike, to round it off?
Famous last words. Wait a moment. No, nothing written on my wall, but I would say the most famous one sort of is like, I mean, it's not witchcraft to pay fairly. You just have to do it, and you actually have to start, and you wrapped it up very nicely. So step one, just say yes. Come and join us and have fun and pay fairly.
Yeah, have fun and pay fairly. Now, doesn't that sound like a good wrap up? All right. Thank you so much, Henrike, for joining our podcast, Reward Nerds podcast. It's brilliant to have, this different angle on it. So thank you so much, Henrike.
I feel nerdy now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very
Bye.
much. Bye.
Thank you.